Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies. And in today's episode, we got to ask some tough questions. But the first one is, how many changes can this team really make? We'll discuss on today's episode.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today in spite of the recent heartbreak. Appreciate you still being with us. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You may know me from some of my other work doing sports talk radio here in the city of Philadelphia at 97.5 The Fanatic. Been doing that for 5 years. I've got 3 seasons under my belt as the host of Locked On Phillies and also 3 seasons as a credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member. Please make sure you're rating, reviewing, and subscribing to the YouTube. We got a lot of off-season content coming your way. I wish it was NLCS content, but still something worth subscribing for to get you notifications when new episodes are posted. It's going to be a busy off-season for the Phils, so you're going to want to be along for the ride for that. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to win $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. So today we're going to start with a discussion about what changes the Philadelphia Phillies can reasonably be expected to make over this very important offseason. Like, what can they do and what doesn't seem to be, like, where are they stuck? Also, we're going to get into a conversation about the president of baseball operations, Dave Dombrowski, and discuss whether or not he did his job to the best extent this year. And we're going to round out with a conversation on whether or not the manager is in any type of trouble this offseason of losing his job potentially. But let's start with the potential changes, because the Phils are in kind of a tight spot when it comes to where they're at. And that's why this was such a big season, because a lot of their big-time players are not getting any younger. They're not moving closer to their prime. The guys that are moving further away from their prime when it comes to position players are JT Realmuto, Bryce Harper. I'd be willing to say Trey Turner, Nick Castellanos, Kyle Schwarber. Those guys are all, and those are your big name guys, they're all moving further away from their prime. It doesn't mean that guys don't still have great years in them. If Bryce Harper went out and won MVP next year, I'm not going to be surprised. If Trey Turner went out and hit 315 with 25 home runs next year, I'm not going to be surprised. Like, I believe there are still some guys. If Kyle Schwarber hits 40 home runs, I'm not going to be surprised. Like, there are still upside to these players, but they're moving in the wrong direction. Now, you have a healthy number of young guys to offset that. Alec Boehm, I believe, is not, well, age-wise, not necessarily in his prime yet. Bryson Stott, the same. Johan Rojas, the same. Brandon Marsh, the same. Guys that played a significant amount of time for this team that you're looking at and saying, well, they're still young players. They're still arbitration eligible or some pre-arb. And okay, you feel good about that. But it makes it difficult when you have so many established players that you believe in or have seen upside in that are just stuck in roles, I guess. Not so much stuck, but they are given these roles. Well, how do you move on? And where are the spots that you could rationally move on from? Let's make it easy. Let's start in the starting rotation. Wheeler and Nola got major extensions. You're not doing anything with them. Christopher Sanchez got an extension. He's not going anywhere. Ranger Suarez is still under contract. He's not going anywhere. Your next line of business for the starting rotation contract-wise is get Ranger Suarez paid. Fifth spot in the rotation, well, Taijuan Walker, he should be gone. It's a lot of money. They can make that change. They'd have to eat salary, but they can do that and get rid of Taijuan Walker. And then you may do Andrew Painter. You may go get a fifth starter for the first part of last year as Andrew Painter continues to work his way back from Tommy John surgery a year and a half ago. But that would be a great opportunity for the Philadelphia Phillies to have an amazing rotation. You're not going to make many changes there. The bullpen, you can always move bullpen arms, right? You could. Trades for trading bullpen guys can be a very common thing over the course of the offseason. Relievers get moved very easily. The 2 guys that are not under contract are Jeff Hoffman and Carlos Estevez. You could probably only bring back one of those guys because they're both going to want closer money. Or John Middleton says, screw it. We'll pay both of them because I want my trophy back. And one of those guys is your setup guy, and one of those guys is your closer. You can make changes to the bullpen. I don't know that you need to, which is crazy because yesterday I told you that was the biggest problem with the series was the bullpen. Well, when I look at it, I say, how much better of a bullpen are you going to honestly build? Like, I know those guys didn't throw well in the postseason, but we had every reason to believe in the quality of the bullpen before. And after a rough 4 games, you have still a lot of reason to believe in the quality of that bullpen. But you can alter things there. It is the bullpen. So the big part of this is going to be the offense, the guys who play every day, the guys that are out there. And what can you do realistically to change the lineup of the Philadelphia Phillies? The first thing you could do is you could go out and you could get a better backup catcher than Garrett Stubbs. I love Garrett Stubbs, the person. The baseball player, obviously not that great. Like, do I think he's a major league player to some extent as a depth guy? Sure. I think there are other teams in baseball that would have Garrett Stubbs as the backup catcher on their major league roster. I do. But I don't think that he's good enough for this team and what they want to accomplish, especially with what JT Realmuto is now, because part of the conversation about JT Realmuto's struggles has to be how much he's played. And how much he's played has to be a conversation about you don't have a good enough backup to give him as much time off as he probably needs at this point in his career. So I would upgrade the backup catcher position, and you'd have to bring in a player, ideally, that would be the heir apparent at catcher to JT Realmuto. So a young, talented player, that's a position that I would say they'd want to spend on in the offseason and bring in someone who you trust. Or you could bring in a proven veteran player who's a little bit better than Garrett Stubbs that you could play just this year and then work on prospects and everything like that. But backup catcher to improve the catcher position by giving JT more rest, something that's certainly possible. First base, you're not changing anything. It's Bryce Harper. Second base, you're not changing anything. It's Bryson Stott. Shortstop, you're not changing anything. It's Trey Turner. Could you flip-flop those guys in the middle? Sure, but I think it's a marginal difference, right? I don't think the key to the Phillies' success is Bryson Stott playing shortstop and Trey Turner playing second. You still have the same guys. Third base is interesting. Could you upgrade over Alec Bohm? There are better third basemen in baseball than Alec Bohm, but there aren't as many as people might feel like there are right now. He went through a bad slump at the end of the year. He may not be a winning ball player, but he's an arbitration-eligible young player that was an all-star starter at third base this year. It's going to be very hard for the Philadelphia Phillies to move on from Alec Bohm and just say, hey, we don't trust him anymore. At the age he's at, with the season he had, regardless of postseason failures, you need to understand, like, as an emotional fan, you might say, I don't want to see this guy take another at-bat with his team. He's mopey. He swings at everything. He drove in 97 RBIs this year. He started for the National League at third base in the All-Star game. There are a lot of teams in baseball that would love to have Alec Bohm. The Phillies do. It would be very difficult for them to move on from him. They would not, I don't believe, get better from that move in the short term. And this is still a team that's focused on the short term. So third base, you're kind of hamstrung there. Let's go to the outfield. Right field, Nick Castellanos, you could make a move there. You could. I believe that with 1 year after this left on his deal, you could potentially offload that contract. Now, Nick Castellanos was your best hitter in this NLDS series. He was one of your better players all year. He's a very solid, consistent veteran player that you know what you're going to get out of him. And he plays a solid right field. You don't necessarily get better if you move on from Nick Castellanos, but can you retool the team with that salary still attached to your payroll? It becomes harder. So there could be a change in right field. All of these are opportunities for change. I'm not yet talking about, well, I would do this or I wouldn't do this. I'm saying, could you move Nick Castellanos? It's possible. Could you move Johan Rojas or bring in a player better than Johan Rojas? You absolutely could in center field. The same goes for left field with Brandon Marsh. Could you trade Brandon Marsh? Could you sign someone better than Brandon Marsh? You could do that. Or could you give the position to Austin Hayes? Or could you sign someone better than Austin Hayes out there in left field? You could do that as well. There is a chance. I don't think it's a big one because I don't think they move everybody and retool everything that fast. But there is a chance that your entire outfield is different. But there's also a pretty solid chance that your entire infield is the same. So is that enough turnover for you? Is that enough to change? Like, you have to be realistic about what can change and who's stuck. And by the way, Kyle Schwarber's not going to not be your designated hitter next year. Double negative for you. Let me make it a little clearer. Kyle Schwarber will be here next year. He will be. You're not moving on from that guy. He had a really, really good season out of the leadoff spot and as a designated hitter, and he deserves to play out his contract here in Philadelphia. And honestly, I may consider giving him another one after next year when his contract is up. But so you're stuck at catcher, first base, second base, shortstop, probably third base, and DH. That means that you're going to be bringing back six at least. And I believe one of these same outfielders will be starting somewhere. I don't know which one it is, but you're probably bringing back 6, if not 7, of your 9 starters in the field or in the lineup this next year. There's not that much room for difference. By the way, you're going to keep Edmundo Sosa. He's still got team control, and he's been a good depth piece for you. You're going to try and keep Austin Hayes. You have a club option for him. I think the team is going to want to see more of Austin Hayes. That is a movable piece if you want to change around outfield depth, but outfield depth has been a problem for the Phillies, and I think Austin Hayes is a solid depth player. I don't know if he's a starter right now, but I think he's a solid depth piece. He's better than Jake Cave. Do you keep him around for that? And then you have guys like Cody Clemens and Weston Wilson that I don't think they get moved. I think they remain with the team in low impact salary roles. They're not going to get paid all that much, but they add depth. So really you have a couple of spots on this roster where things will look different. That could be a good thing if you like consistency, but if you're scared of the run-it-back approach and blame this year's failures on that, well, then you may not love that. And I understand both sides of that perspective. I'm more of a consistency is king type of guy and keep it that way as long as you can. But I understand why after this year's postseason, you'd want a different field just for the sake of being different. But I don't know that presidents of baseball operations, GMs, front offices operate that way. They operate with significantly less emotion than we do in the fan base. And I kind of trust Dave Dombrowski. I should trust him probably more than I feel like I do right now. We're going to talk about him coming up. Did Dave Dombrowski do his job this year? How much blame does he share for the NLDS collapse again? I don't even know if I could call it the collapse, just not showing up against the Mets. Well, we'll discuss that coming up next as we continue today's episode of Locked On Phillies. But first, let me tell you about hymns, okay? They're absolutely important for you as a guy. All right, guys, sometimes intimate moments, they happen spontaneously, and we always want to be ready so we can perform in the bedroom. Well, Hims provides access to treatments that can help you stay hard and last longer. Sorry, it's hard not to laugh, but it's not a laughing matter when you can't do that, when you want to be intimate with a partner and it just doesn't work for you. So giving you that boost of confidence so you can be ready whenever the mood strikes is something incredibly important. Hims is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. It's awkward to go to the doctors or talk to people about it. You don't have to. Hims provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewable hard mints and Viagra and Cialis, and their generics for up to 95% cheaper. So they're cutting you a deal as well. The process is 100% online. So there's no need for uncomfortable doctor's visits like I was talking about. You just answer a series of questions on their site, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option for you. And if prescribed, your medication ships directly to you in discreet packaging for free. It's great. No insurance is needed. And one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. So with hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, Hims can help you find the ED option that works for you. So start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. Again, that's hims.com/lockedon. Got a little disclaimer for you. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products, which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plans. All right, let's talk about Dave Dombrowski and the job that he did this year. And he's catching some heat. Or I don't know. Well, he is. We had some Dombrowski comments on our last video. And so I know that there are people out there that are blaming the president of baseball operations for this. Here's what I will say. One thing that we always struggle with as fans of teams, not just baseball teams, not just here in Philadelphia, but all fans. You agree with the move at the time of the move. And then you see how it plays out and you say, wow, that was a dumb move. The president of baseball operations, the GM of the team, the whoever in the front office of whatever sport, they are working with the knowledge that they have at the time of the signing, the trade, the move that you're making. They do not get the benefit of hindsight. If Dave Dombrowski right now could go back in a time machine to himself ahead of the 2023 season and say, yo, don't sign Taijuan Walker to this contract, he'd do it in a heartbeat. but he can't do that. At the time, Taijuan Walker was a proven veteran pitcher who we believed was a guy that could add to the back end of the rotation. So can you fault Dave Dombrowski for that contract? Partially because you should evaluate that, and I can't absolve him of mistakes just because he didn't know at the time. Like, his job requires foresight, but I can't crush him the way that you might want to with the Taijuan Walker thing now. And that's not really this year's deal. That's more of a conversation from last year that is just carried over, and hopefully they move on from the guy. But let's evaluate what he did this year. First of all, he goes out and he tries to bring in outfield depth by signing Whit Merrifield. That was an absolute disaster. Can you blame Dave Dombrowski? I don't think you can in this one. Dave Dombrowski brought in a guy that was willing to take on a lesser role, that looked like he still had something in the tank, that had been an all-star in the past, who had been an American League hits leader in the past, that you believed was this utility Swiss Army knife. I was so excited when Whit Merrifield signed here. And you might say, well, why was he still available as late as he was? The reason why was because he didn't want to take a lesser role on a team. He wanted to be a starter somewhere, and he wasn't really at the point where he was a starter in his career anymore. And Dave Dombrowski massaged the situation and talked him into a role with the team, and he decided he wanted to come play for the Philadelphia Phillies. And I don't think he made a bad decision, because the Phillies ended up being a damn good baseball team. So he picked well, and Dave Dombrowski, I think, signed well in the moment, and then Whit Merrifield just completely fell off a cliff. So what are you going to do? Like, that sucks, but at the time, I don't think it was an awful move. It does suck that you didn't get somebody better, but I'm not going to take Dave Dombrowski to total task for the Whit Merrifield signing. And I'm also going to compliment Dave Dombrowski in the front office on making the decision to release him when they did, to open up that roster spot, because you knew you weren't getting anywhere with Whit Merrifield. I would have kept him longer, and that might have been my mistake, because he had moments in Atlanta where he signed after the Phillies, but he didn't really go crazy down there. So Whit Merrifield a miss, but not like one of those glaring, how did you not see this misses. The other big moves really were the trade deadline moves. The acquisition of Tanner Banks. I don't really have too big of an issue, because the price you paid wasn't huge for him. I wish you'd gotten a better lefty out of the bullpen, but the bullpen already looked strong. So I can't fault Dave Dombrowski based on the bullpen imploding like none of us saw in the postseason. None of us saw coming, I should say, in the postseason. Tanner Banks, whatever, kind of like a wash move. Carlos Estevez was really, really good. That was an awesome acquisition by Dave Dombrowski. He was about the only bullpen pitcher that was good in this series against the Mets. I know he gave up the grand slam to Lindor. He got put in a tough spot with the bases loaded. That sucks, but I thought he was one of your better pitchers out of the bullpen, which isn't saying much considering that. But in the series and in the regular season, he was lights out. Like, he was very, very good. That was a valuable acquisition by Dave Dombrowski. He gets plus marks on that. The Austin Hayes one is where this conversation gets tricky, because I've heard people say Austin Hayes stinks. I don't want to see this guy in a Phillies uniform anymore. A miss by Dave Dombrowski at the trade deadline. How was that the guy you went and got? You didn't improve the outfield at all. He gave you nothing, blah, blah, like all of this stuff. All right, guys. Dave Dombrowski went out and got Austin Hayes from the Baltimore Orioles. And who you gave up? Well, ended up being guys that cost the Baltimore Orioles their season. So it's not like you gave up guys that you really, really needed to keep. And when you look at Austin Hayes and what he went through coming to Philadelphia, so you switch teams, which naturally it's not just like it's more plug and play than basketball or football or hockey, but there is an element of figuring out where you fit in this new team and in this new city and figuring all that. That normally takes like a week or two, right, to get settled in. He had plenty of time compared to that time frame, but then he has a hamstring injury. So he's got to deal with that. He's out for a little bit, and then he's working his way back, but he's probably not at 100%. He wants to get back out there to help this team in a push for the division and the top seed in the playoffs. And he comes back for a couple weeks, and then he has the kidney infection. And I'm sure that was not easy to go through. I don't know how good he was feeling when he got his opportunities in the NLDS, but that's a scary thing. And that's more than just like, I tweaked my ankle, but I could still work on all this stuff. That lays you up for a couple of days or a couple of weeks, that kidney infection type of situation. It's a scary thing health-wise. So all I'm saying is, do you think it's fair to evaluate a player on post-trade deadline performance when he had an injury, an illness, and was playing as part of like a platoon situation because of those things? I largely think because he didn't get enough opportunity to prove he needed a position above Brandon Marsh, because Marsh was healthy, even if he wasn't playing all that well. Like, I don't think that that's a fair amount of time or situation to evaluate Austin Hayes in. I'm not here telling you, oh, he's an all-star caliber player right now. Like, I don't know, but I'm not going to tell you he stinks. I'm not going to tell you Dave Dombrowski missed. I'm going to tell you that the Phillies were unlucky that the guy that was their big acquisition as a position player hurt his hamstring and then got a kidney infection. That sucks. And maybe if he was healthy, this team would have looked a lot different down the stretch. Maybe they wouldn't have looked different at all. But we don't know, and that's not Dave Dombrowski's fault. He didn't have these injuries or issues when he was acquired. The Phillies got unlucky health-wise with him. They've been largely lucky health-wise all year. So I can't call Austin Hayes a miss. I can't call him a hit, but I can't call him a full miss like a lot of people have. And that's why with Dave Dombrowski, I can't crush him. Could he have done more at the trade deadline? Maybe a little bit, but I think he did a good amount in the moment, and it didn't work out. And it's not his best season, but it's certainly not his worst season. It's certainly not a season where a future Hall of Fame executive is going to lose his job or deserves to draw major criticism from the fan base because of his moves. If you want to be a little bit annoyed with Dave Dombrowski, be my guest. But you can't demolish him for this year, guys. You can't. He did what he could do. Now, he's got a big offseason, and you should probably get to a point where you can trust him because he's going to make some big decisions for this organization over the next couple months. I still have faith in him. Those are my reasons why. Coming up, well, we're going to discuss if you still have faith in the manager. And this is a conversation that will exist all offseason long as we continue today's episode. All right, let's talk about Prize Picks first, though, because Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. You can run your game all season long on Prize Picks. So what you do is you have this lineup that you set. You can put multiple players in there, 2, 4, 6, and you put a dollar amount down and you say, okay, I think this guy's going to have more hits than the projected number. I think this guy's going to have less strikeouts than the projected number. You can mix sports and you could go more touchdowns, more receiving yards, and mix that with baseball. Oh, by the way, hockey started. So more assists, more saves. You can add those. Oh, by the way, basketball starting soon. More points, more assists, more rebounds. All of this stuff can be combined on Prize Picks. It's the best. And you put it all together. You're not playing against other players. No, you're not playing against some bots on the app. No, you're just playing against the numbers. It's super simple. That makes it really, really easy to find your way to a nice payday. Prize Picks is the best way to get action on sports in over 30 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. So you got to go ahead and check it out. And you might be saying, oh, well, maybe, but I only will if you cut me a deal. I got good news. We'll cut you a deal. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB, and you'll get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. There's no reason you shouldn't be doing this, folks. It helps make you like sports again after this Philadelphia sports heartbreak, the latest one. So go ahead and check out Prize Picks. Run your game. All right, the Rob Thomson discussion. This will not be the last time we have it. This is not the end-all, be-all. We will not come to a conclusion right here. We won't, because there's a lot of discourse when it comes to the manager of this baseball team. Rightfully so. There should be discourse. Now, are the opinions all rightful? Are they all respectful? Are they all just based on his resume? No, and I'm here to set the rightful questions aside from the unfair ones. But this will not be a simple conversation. It will not be one that just happens today and then I never talk about again. But it's time that we start and open up this discussion for the offseason. It's going to be one of the main storylines of the offseason. Rob Thomson got a 1-year extension ahead of this season. His contract runs, through 2025. So if the Phillies do nothing, they don't have to pay him any more money. They don't have to renegotiate anything. He will be the manager through 2025. Then his contract will be up. Now, do I think they're going to give Rob Thomson an extension? No, I do not think that. But do I think that they're going to fire him? I do not think so. And I'm going to make my case over the offseason as to why. But here's my opening arguments, if you will, for this however many month, 4 or 5 month trial of Rob Thomson. They may make an announcement as early as like a week from now and say, Rob Thompson's coming back, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But that's not going to necessarily just win the fan base over. It's going to be your opinion on him as well, which is important. So that's why this discussion will continue to exist. Rob Thomson does a lot of things really well. Over the course of 162 games, he knows how to win a bunch of baseball games. He knows how to deliver a team to the postseason healthy. He knows how to, when his team is not healthy, sit guys down, work through that with players and know how much time they need and how much time they can play and this, that, and the other thing to make sure that all the players are healthy and happy and available for October. That is a skill that cannot be overstated. Knowing your players, knowing how to manage 162 is something a lot of good managers don't do all that well. What is Rob Thomson bad at? In-game strategy, especially with the bullpen, is not his strong suit. He makes questionable decisions. Now, some of those, I believe, are, again, we talked about we can't use hindsight with Dave Dombrowski because he doesn't have it at the time. Some of those are hindsight. Some of those are glaringly obvious mistakes by Rob Thomson. We saw some in this series against the New York Mets. So he has deficiencies in the strategy department. How much strategy is involved in being the manager of a baseball team? Over 162, significantly less. In the postseason, it becomes much more of a focal point. So would you give up what Rob Thomson does well over the bulk of the season, the regular season, 162 games, for a manager that would potentially be better in the clutch in October? You might say resoundingly, well, yeah, I want him to be better in October. Well, think about it this way, folks. The Arizona Diamondbacks went to the World Series last year. They did not make the postseason. The Texas Rangers won the World Series last year. They did not make the postseason. The Atlanta Braves won the division last year. They barely made the postseason and promptly got bounced. 2 games against the San Diego Padres. Good team, but still. I know injuries were a big thing for the Braves, and I know there are contributing factors to all 3 of those teams that I mentioned. The point is the postseason ain't guaranteed. Getting there is a feat. Whether it feels like it to us here in Philadelphia or not, it doesn't make it any easier, right? Whether our expectations are higher or not, it doesn't mean that you just waltz to the postseason every year. That is not an easy thing to do. We should know that from the decade-long postseason drought we went through, but we forget quickly in this town how bad times can be compared to the good times that we've had relatively. And I'm not trying to make you feel better. I'm pissed too. Like, this is not the good times. They just had a heartbreaking loss and I'm losing my mind. But I'm just saying, like, we cannot just say, oh, regular season doesn't matter. To some extent, it doesn't matter. Seeding is somewhat important, but less so with the new playoff structure. And maybe you can give up a little bit in a regular season manager. And maybe that's a conversation for why you need someone different than Rob Thomson. But you can't just say, screw the regular season. We'll figure it out in October and then not get there. Rob Thompson's players have never once given up on him. They've never once had a bad word to say about him. They've never once had a locker room issue with him. The closest they came was Taijuan Walker complaining last year about not pitching in the postseason. And guess what? You stink, dude. So we saw that this year. Turns out Rob Thomson made the right decision. You just got to wear that. He has never had a disgruntled player publicly. I'm sure there are back and forth in the clubhouse that happen all the time, but they keep it under wraps. And the players never come out with it, and he never comes out with it. He seems to run a tight ship. That is something important over 162 baseball games. The Phillies locker room is one of the tightest in baseball. The manager gets a lot of credit for that. The GM does. The president of baseball operations does as well. Those guys do. But Rob Thomson handles personalities well. He does all of this stuff that people might go, vibes. Listen, that's important. It might not feel as important because you don't see the direct effects on the field, but that is important. And yet, when you get to the postseason, or when you have trouble setting a lineup, or when you don't know what guys are supposed to play where, and maybe people feel that Rob Thomson is not as tough on players as they think he should be, those are all valid critiques that we'll have to discuss. And it's hard to do from outside the locker room. But when you talk about how tough should he be on players, something you should remember is you may be sitting down watching this at your computer or on your phone, and you could be someone who's 45, 50, 60 years old and grew up in the Buddy Ryan Eagles era but lived through the Buddy Ryan Eagles era and everything like that. And you ate nails for breakfast and you walked uphill to school both ways and you want to be coach tough. But these players aren't you. You got to remember this. These players are not you. Some of them need to be coached easier. Now, some of them do need a little kick in the rear every once in a while. Maybe Rob Thompson's not the right guy for that, but assuming how guys should be coached without knowing the players, it's a tough thing to do. Rob Thomson seems to have a good handle on who the guys on his team are, so I default to him on that. It's so tough because he does the intangible things really, really well. And the tangible things are very, very questionable. And it all mashes together to have 2.5 very successful seasons in the regular season. Well, very successful seasons overall when you evaluate everything compared to other Major League Baseball teams with no ring to show for it and a regression in the postseason. And is it time just for a change for change's sake? I don't think the Phillies are at that point yet this offseason. I think that's a next year conversation if they don't do better in the postseason. But to me, Rob Thompson's job is safe. To a lot of fans, they're over him. And I get it. But again, one of the big questions of this offseason is this change you make for change's sake only? And is that the right way you want to operate? Because as much as you might not think someone's the best option, you don't know if they're the worst option. You don't know if there are worse options. All right? So you got to remember that when we make these calls. That's all for today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Thank you so much for checking us out today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now make your next listen Locked On MLB. Sully, Paul Francis Sullivan, he's covering baseball in general. I'm not talking about the playoffs the rest of the way. Maybe I'll make a mention of someone who wins the World Series. It hurts too much. I'm not doing it. I'm going to talk about the Phillies and the Phillies only. So that's why you should talk or listen to Sully, because he's going to talk about everything. If you want that, go get him. I can't emotionally bring myself to that place. But Locked On MLB is available wherever you get your podcasts and also on YouTube. So check him out. And please make sure you're rating, reviewing, and subscribing to Locked On Phillies on our YouTube channel. Appreciate that very much. Hang in there. Take the weekend. Decompress. We'll try and have a little bit less emotional stuff to talk about on Monday as we continue the offseason. But I'll talk to you then on our next episode of Locked On Phillies.